Hi everyone, we're in Chapter 8 and we're going to focus on procuring and sustaining resources. And this is a very labor intensive and information intensive chapter, so I want you to read it very carefully and really focus in on what correlates with how budgeting is done in your particular organization. So what we're looking at in this chapter really looks at the planning associated with assuring the fiscal health of the organization. And that's really something that as managers, you are actually a good steward for your organization to make sure that the fiscal responsibilities are met. So this also ties within strategic planning. As a leader, you must ground your decisions based on budgets and based on the overall goals of the organization. And with those goals, looking back at what we've looked at, of course, includes the vision, the mission, and the values of the organization. So there has to be that very clear balance and following the budgets while maintaining the overall vision of the organization is a really tough balancing act sometimes. And it's important, one nuance is to actually correlate the two and help your staff to understand how being a fiscally healthy organization will help you to meet your organizational vision, because you can't do it if you're not in business. So when we're looking at some of the key components or skills that we're looking at for budgeting is that you're able to prioritize available resources to manage the costs, make recommendations for new services or different needs in services, evaluating what's already being provided and if that's still an appropriate service. You are also focused on advocating for resources that are needed, and of course, as we alluded to earlier, being fiscally responsible. So those are some of the overarching views, and again, all that ties into budgeting is being very wise with the use of your resources and helping those that you serve to be wise with the resources as well and understand why they really need to be good stewards of the monies of the organization. So one thing that is really important to understand as we're looking at budgeting is the overall shift in healthcare, and everything should be in context of what is happening out there, so to speak, as far as the changes in the shift to value-based reimbursement, as well as focusing on the community and population-based health, and looking at those preventative services as well. So we're seeing a shift from cost reimbursement to value-based. So that's a huge issue, and that's what is actually causing many of the growing pains within organizations at this time. So when we're looking at basic planning, the budget is a systematic plan, and it's really a best estimate of revenue and expenses. And just kind of keep that in mind that it's a best estimate. And sometimes to gain that best estimate is looking at what happened last year and then looking contextually as to what changes are occurring and accommodate for those particular changes. So the three overall main purposes of the budget is to plan the objectives and program activities and fiscal resources needed to trigger evaluation of the effectiveness and to provide a standard of performance for nurse administrators or managers. So in looking at the nitty-gritty as far as devising a budget, take a very close look at the 8 components on page 170 for proposing the budget. So really look at those 8 components and clearly understand those. And as you're reading, also examine the cost centers and the detail that is required for budgets as correlated with the objectives. So keep those things in mind, how everything ties together And budgets are generally broken down into stages. So we're looking at formulation, review, and enactment and execution. So when we look at formulating a budget, we're gathering information, much like we gather information about our patients, and figure out what plan is most appropriate. So we're really taking an overview of what has happened in the past, what we need to do in the future, and looking at all the information that we need to formulate a valuable and accurate budget. So we need to look at our strategic plan. Again, looking back at what we've covered previously, again, everything needs to be focused on that strategic plan and the vision, the mission, and the values of the organization. That's the underpinning of absolutely everything that we do. And sometimes we lose that connection when we're doing budgeting because we're so focused on getting the numbers to work out. But there has to be a contextual understanding of what's required in the delivery of care. And as far as the review and enactment, we really want to look at the multiple levels, the approval process of the budget, and how there's different views from different areas, from how the CNO may view a particular budget proposal and how it's looked at within the context of the entire organization as well. And then we're also looking at execution. So we're looking at directly evaluating on an ongoing basis what we've formulated and what we've approved as far as the budget. And know that there are variances, and that's one thing as a manager you really need to focus in on. Why are there variances, and how can that be accommodated for what is occurring that maybe wasn't planned for in the particular budget? So as a manager, you need to articulate those types of things that shift and change throughout time. So really take a look at the costs and the expenses. There's two helpful tables on pages 173 and 174, so really familiarize yourself with that. And look at the difference between direct and indirect costs. And that kind of confuses folks once in a while. And direct is typically that direct care delivery piece, and indirect costs may be electricity or something else outside, but it is a very necessary cost in order to provide services. So make sure that you have a really good understanding of both direct and indirect costs. And in addition, really focus on the different cost centers and familiarize yourself with that as well. As you continue your reading, starting on page 177, there start some definitions, and really carefully read through this section because you need to know what the terms mean in order to apply them and put them in the big picture, so to speak. So really look at those key definitions of revenue, patient days, fiscal year, year to date, those types of things, and look also at the different types of budgeting approaches. Be sure to know what type of approach or approaches your organization uses so that you can focus in on those factors that are so important to you and your practice. So you want to look at the types of budgets, the operating budget. You want to look at things like negative cash flow, which is really a pertinent consideration, especially when we're looking at some payer sources that are very tardy, so to speak, as far as reimbursement. So it may cause you to extend a lot of services, but not really being reimbursed in a timely manner. And that's a juggling act that has to be kept track of, and making sure that billing is going out routinely and that effective bills are going out so that you get the reimbursement that is due to you based on services provided. So really focus in on those factors as well. And Make sure that as you're developing the budget, take a look at the worksheet that's actually on page 185. So that just kind of clearly illustrates that budget worksheet, and that's very helpful to see it and to analyze the worksheet as well. As we're moving on in the chapter, be sure to focus on pages 187 through 191, looking at the personnel budget, and this tends to be the most variable as far as budgets is anything related to personnel, and the most changeable as well because of staffing and staff loss and training and all of those factors that go into consideration when you're looking at really your biggest expense is personnel. In addition, take a look at the capital budget, and table 8.5 is helpful to really kind of take a look at and also examine the 8 components that are listed on page 192. That will help you as you're examining responsibilities in relation to the capital budget as well. So monitoring the budget is such a key element because we formulate budgets, we put them into play, we execute them, but in actuality life varies quite a bit from what we project, and we need to be on top of what is going on and very knowledgeable about what is going on within our particular area of control, and really looking at the budget on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis in addition to that end of the year evaluation. And one very simplistic way to kind of monitor things along the way is to actually kind of divide your budget up into 12 months or even smaller months, and then you can see percentage-wise where you are as far as your expenditures or your revenue that you've had by month to month. So basically you're slicing and dicing the budget into 12 parts, 1 part for each month, and then you can look and see at that particular month where you are in context with what your projections are. I hope that makes sense. But it really helps to look on an ongoing basis that maybe you should have 10% of your expenditures are approximately 10% of your expenditures in the first month and 10% of your revenues in the first month. So then you build month to month as you're getting closer to fiscal end to see where you are, and that will provide some information to you. In addition, there's certain parts of the year that are more costly than others depending on what's going on health-wise, and your expenditures may increase during a particular month, and as well as the revenues may increase during a month, depending on what that particular time frame may be. It may be during flu season where you have an increase in admissions, those types of things. And that holds true for other organizations outside of acute care, and the book really focuses on acute care, but the budgeting processes are similar in other areas of practice as well, but some of the reimbursement is a little different, and I just want to add the nuance that some organizations are really focused on grant-based reimbursements. So again, the budget concepts fit for grants, but also we need to look at those particular deliverables throughout the grant period, making sure that those deliverables are allocated and that we're allocating our staff time based on those particular grants and allocating those costs to those particular grants. So I hope that helps a little bit, knowing that there are different factors in looking at budgeting, and it really depends on your area of practice as to how the budgeting process occurs. So be really keen into connecting with your financial officers, connecting with a mentor that has done budgeting within your organization for a long period of time, because they will help you to gain the information that you need that is particular to your organization.